Hi, everybody. Welcome. It's time for Baltimore Comic-Con Live. And man, we've already got a nice lineup of people that are watching us live. Thank you very much. My name's John Suntress. I am the host of the Word Balloon podcast, and we'll be moderating several of these panels over the weekend. We're really glad to have you. We've got an incredible lineup, and we're going to start things off with a great combination of creators that are part of the brand new publisher, AWA Artists, Writers, and Artisans. This panel is called Creative Inspirations for Winter 2020. And these are familiar names, but they are creators that are putting out some brand new books for the winter period for AWA. So let's get things started. First of all, I want to welcome Dalibor Talajic. See, I screwed it up anyway. I apologize, bud. I tried for it. Talajic.
My last name's been screwed up so many times, I even forgot myself my last name. So we'll go with Talajic.
Well, it's good to see you, man. Next, an old friend. It's a pleasure, man. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Let's welcome Cullen Bunn to the conversation. Good to see you, Cullen.
Hey, guys. How are you?
Excellent. Doing all right. And let's see here. We got the great Ethan Sachs. How's it going?
You just have the regular Ethan Sachs. Sorry.
And Nelson Blake the second. Got to include that Roman numeral, man, to make everything legit. NB2 for you, Chad. Here we go. I'll get him. There he is. How are you, man? Is he there?
Nope, am I yet. Okay.
Now he's there. There we go.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm doing fantastic, man. I found out a long time ago if I don't put the 2, my dad gets my mail. So that literally happened. And I started putting. I didn't put the 2 for years, and then he called me. He was like, "Hey, did you order something?" And I'm like, "Oh, okay, we got to fix this thing."
Well, that can be embarrassing depending on what you order. Absolutely, man. All right, now from the Great White North, one of my favorite artist writers out there, and a fine filmmaker as well, Kari Andrews. Good to see you, Kari.
Hey, nice to be here, guys.
Absolutely, man. Seriously, Axel and Jemis, they cherry-picked a lot of great creators. And finally, I want to welcome, and he's kind of going to be the point man in general talking about the AWA line. It's Mike Costa, everybody. Nice to see you, Mike.
Hey, everyone. Great to be here.
Fantastic, man. So, Mike, tell me about these group of books and launching them now. Is it just a matter of schedule in terms of getting them ready? Or, what was the thinking in terms of, these guys debuting right now?
Sure. So we just started about 2 years ago, just started collecting talent and getting things off the ground. We had our first launches back in March. Dalibor actually had a book in that launch called Hotel that's out in trade form now. Everyone should check out, right in time for Halloween. And we launched the week, basically everything shut down. So if everyone remembers that week when, the NBA shut down and schools started to shut down and the country just all of a sudden went from this is going to be okay to we're in lockdown now, we launched right in the middle of that week. So despite that, audiences found the books and we published the first issues of them online, and we kept creating. We didn't kind of shut our doors. A few things had to go on pause, but we were still able to have a few projects in the hopper, finish those up, and start looking at the landscape. I believe, with the exception of Ethan, everyone on this call had sort of already had their wheels turning on their projects that they're working on now at that point.
Okay.
Where Ethan comes in is, again, the country shut down. We're sort of looking at this COVID crisis, and Axel and some other people in the company started talking about how can we look at this and how can we maybe do some good in this time. And the thought we turned to was journalism, was kind of covering these sort of everyday heroes who are keeping the country going, who are combating this on the front lines. So we sort of came up with a concept, and we looked at who could write this, who could be a part of this, who has experience in comic books, has experience as a journalist and has contacts with people that he can feature. And when you start putting that Venn diagram together, the name Ethan Sachs becomes one of the only names that you can go to. And Ethan did a wonderful job with it, and we were able to publish digitally with NBC News these COVID Chronicles stories, and now that's being collected into a trade that'll be out in December.
That's excellent. Ethan, it's funny, just a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to, and now I'm suddenly forgetting, but I remember when Marvel did The Call and that other book like that right in the period of 9/11, and those were first responder books and very timely for the moment. So yeah, I mean, again, based on your journalism skills and your writing and stuff, yeah, tell us about coming up with COVID Chronicles.
Well, first of all, Axel Alonso called me, and this was very much his idea. He paired me with an incredible artist in Dalibor, who just, you could, when he drew these people, you know, in the some of the darkest moments of their life, you could feel the pain etched on their faces or the fear. But, you know, basically it wasn't that challenging to find people. We looked literally across the world, and there are several billion possible stories, since this was a pandemic that affects just about everybody.
Certainly.
So we were lucky that these people shared so much time, just hours and hours of interviews and personal photos that we used as photo references. So
wow. Dalibor, you know, again, I'm so glad that you're involved with this, because your style of art really does bring a sense of realism to, you know, a project like this. And yeah, I mean, God, as Ethan just said, to kind of convey not only their stories, but the emotion behind these stories as well, you know, that's a big task.
Yeah, it's slippery terrain, because it's real people, it's real time, and you don't want to insult anybody. You don't want to exploit, you know, in a bad sense, other people's misfortune. So my approach to this was to, well, let's say underplay, you know, just to make it as naturalistic as possible, but, you know, make it convincing, make it, it's horrible to say regarding the subject, but make it attractive, you know, so people could emotionally relate.
No, I understand. You know, was there a tough story, both of you, that, I mean, again, you're kind of living these people's own, you know, experiences in the storytelling and everything. And God, you know, I, as a news journalist myself, was very busy on 9/11, and again, I can relate to from that standpoint, and first responders having to do what they had to do. And it was a tough couple of days and stuff. And I would imagine you guys living with these stories must have been tough as well, Ethan.
Some of them were tough. There was one in particular, someone I knew tangentially who had COVID and barely survived, a single mom in Brooklyn. And she sent us this video message, which I didn't share with the team, but I used it, you know, I used it still, and I definitely used it in the piece. That was basically a goodbye to her son.
Wow.
Yeah, her like 4 or 5 years old. I think it's 4. And, you know, the message, she wasn't sure. She's very religious, and you know, she talked about, you know, the God and Jesus, and so I think she was not necessarily afraid to die, but she was afraid to leave him. And it was a very moving video. So it was very difficult to you know, and there is a lot of trust that goes with sending that, you know, to me. So I don't take that for granted.
Yeah, Dalibor, were there specific stories that were really kind of tough to draw?
Yeah, I should point out this same story that Ethan mentioned, because being a parent myself, in the story, this mother sends the child away from herself in fear not to transfer this disease. So that's really a hard moment. And there was another story about an Italian opera singer that was very important to me because I kind of grew up in the opera because my mother was an opera singer.
Wow.
So this is like, you know, the music, the power of music, at the first you would say this is something ridiculous, this is something that's not required, that's not needed, but art, any art form is what talks to our spirits, talks to our souls, and this is, you know, what keeps us going. So this ridiculous action, that guy is standing on a balcony and singing his heart out, you know, it was really important to me.
Understood. Is the series wrapped up? You said the trade is coming out. Has the series wrapped up?
Yes.
For the moment, it has.
Okay. And then you're going to see about possibly a volume 2 or whatever?
Well, I mean, hopefully the world gets back to normal before that thought even crosses our mind. But there's a lot of stories to tell from this past year.
Certainly.
For sure.
Well, transitioning to Kari's book, because really, Mike, the AWA line, Upshot. Excuse me,
Okay.
Upshot really started with an ironic, pandemic.
Well, yeah, that's a great point. One of the featured book, J. Michael Straczynski and Mike Deodato's The Resistance, that sort of kicks off this shared universe. The central moment in it is a pandemic.
Yeah.
It's of a different nature, but the fact that we launched with this book into a pandemic was certainly not something that was intended, but proved to be very prescient on Straczynski's part, having written the script long before. And I remember when Axel sort of first started talking about bringing Straczynski on and their first conversations that they had, they were looking at, what are the fears now? Like, what are the giant obstacles that we have to contend with now with, nuclear war being a previous generation's sort of impetus for comic book universes. And now it's, this threat of disease, and he saw that a year in advance. But anyway, the universe launches with a pandemic that leaves a certain of the population with superpowers, almost completely at random, very young, and that's where Kari's story kind of picks up, with someone who survived having this disease and now has superpowers. But because society kind of doesn't accept those superpowers, or they're viewed as dangerous, or they're viewed as illegal, he sort of has to hide them while also trying to contend with the normal pressures and difficulties that a high schooler would have at that age.
Yeah, tell us about it, Kari. E-RATIC? Is that how you say it?
Yeah, E-RATIC.
So, yeah, you don't have to emphasize the erratic. Okay.
You can. There's no harm, no foul. Yeah, I mean, he's like kind of a, he's a teenage superhero archetype. And I thought, Axel presented me with the concept of the world and asked me if I had any contributions. And I thought, well, that's an archetype that needs to be there, whatever that is. And I just kind of threw that into the ether, and E-RATIC just kind of came back at me. And I'm very excited to create a new superhero with a tail, and I haven't seen one in a long time. So that's my shining moment right there. E-RATIC's tail.
When you say tail, I'm assuming story, not actually.
No, it's a tail.
It is a tail.
It
is a tail. All right, I haven't seen it yet.
It's part of his costume, but
Okay.
It's kind of like a grounding wire. So he basically has the world's, it's like as if his superpowers were like the world's crappiest cell phone battery. They last for 10 minutes. He can do amazing ultimate adventures, and then it's dead, and he has to wait 24 hours to build back up those powers. He's basically like a human capacitor, like a storm cloud. He's got to build up the energy before he can explode it. And I thought that would be pretty fun to I could only imagine the situations of like 10-minute power cycle, like what. Trying to save the world in 10 minutes at 15 years old. I kind of came up with the costume, the tail, the tagline, the logo, kind of all in one go. and I just kind of drew a cover and gave it to Axel, and he was like, "Yeah, let's do it." So that's kind of the origin story there.
That's outstanding, man. First story arc, 5 issues.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Excellent. And when does it debut? Does it debut in December? Does it, when?
I think so. I don't know.
December 2nd. Yes.
Hey, my birthday. Fantastic. That'll be a nice birthday present. Thank you for that.
Yes,
remember that.
Pay for yours. I'm not. Come on.
Kari, you got to come back on my birthday, and we'll talk about it if that's all right.
Let's do it,
Absolutely.
man.
That'll be terrific. So yeah, this is the first superhero in this new universe.
It was what was hard about this one was to kind of mash up this real world pandemic creation superhero universe with kind of an archetypal teenage superhero. So that was kind of a bit of a challenge to try to figure out how to mesh those two in a way that felt appropriate, but this is before COVID, but appropriate, but real, but kind of fun. Like it's a fun book, but still like a lot of teens are just full of angst, walking angst machines. So the best thing about Peter Parker is how horrible his life is. So I want to, I'm always looking to make characters' lives horrible, and when it's a teenager, it's real easy and real fun.
Well, and also beyond the problems of this universe with the pandemic they're facing and the catalyst for his powers and stuff, do you look now, because you've had your experiences with Spider-Man and other teen heroes of the Marvel universe, is this a new opportunity to say something else with teens that you haven't had the opportunity to say before?
Well, the funny thing is, I have kids, and I'll say a new component to this hero, which you haven't quite seen before. This is a teen archetype character, so you've kind of probably seen that kind of a person before. We love that kind of a person. He's an archetype. But I've never actually seen a representation of the modern school system. I stumbled across the Pink Floyd video, Another Brick in the Wall, just last week. And, it's kind of this archetypal headmaster, and he's rapping the knuckles of this poor young boy because he's daring to write poetry when he should be succeeding and achieving. And he's pumped through this machine of students, and they come out of desks and they go into hamburger meat. And now all I can think of was like, well, this didn't age well. This is what a quaint idea that a young boy is not allowed to write poetry. Whap! It's like in today's school system, it's almost you're not allowed not to write poetry. You're not allowed to succeed, and you're not allowed to achieve, and you don't grade anything. You don't keep score. It's like a bit of it's a different world. So I just have kids in that system, so it's just a fun. I'm poking fun at modern school a little bit too. So that's kind of a fun thing. But again, with the framework of like, because teens don't change, whether the school system changes or not, whatever. But teens are always the same, and it's a hard that transition to boyhood to manhood is like. Why we all love those teen stories is because we've all been there, or we're going to be there, or defines us. Like in many ways, that like getting awarded powers when you're a teenager is almost like getting awarded your manhood. Like what do you do with that, with those abilities, and how do you harness your potential to have a good life for you and your family and your friends, and that journey is one that I think is always interesting.
How secret is his identity going to be?
Oh, totally secret. The good thing is, like, in this world, it better be secret, or there'll be consequences. So I always like characters where if they were to be discovered, there would be consequences. So my favorite version of a Superman is, desperately trying to pretend he's Clark Kent. It doesn't make sense in that character doesn't make sense in any world in DC Comics. I don't think that weird, even Peter Parker, like in the movies, his mask is off all the time. Like there's really, it's kind of a throwback to try to keep that. But in this world, there are real consequences. He's got a single mom. He's got like a brother. Like, they don't know he's got powers. Like if the government were to find out he had these powers, there would be, things would happen. So it's been fun to it's always fun to hide your identity, save the world. You've got 10 minutes to do both. It's that kind of a situation.
Well, and exactly what you described at DC and Marvel right now, it's been interesting that the comics are starting to reflect the movies, where it's like, yeah, secret identities, their old hat. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I do think it's interesting. Yeah. That's why I asked the question. So that's
to be honest, in many ways, I think it's a deviation of the archetype of superpowers. In the I think the archetypal function of a superhero is to have these abilities, to do these things, but to keep them sheathed and keep people safe. Only use them when you need them. Don't, it's not you saving the world, it's your alter ego. And in many ways, the modern world is like, no, it's you. Get on Twitter, get on Facebook, you're the hero. And it's like, I think that's what's fracturing society. So I wouldn't mind so much if we retreated back to our secret entities and kept our exploits more modest.
I agree. A little anonymity.
Celebrity culture, I think, would help the world a little bit today.
I totally agree with that. Yet here I am, a YouTuber, saying all this. So maybe
I'm here too.
I'm not practicing what I preach. I don't know.
I'm here too, so
I should be Captain Obvious instead. Maybe that would be better.
Hypocrites, John.
Hey, let's talk about Bite-Size now, and Cullen and Nelson. So tell me about coming up with this book. I'll start with Cullen. I always start with the writer. Forgive me, Nelson, but go ahead.
Yeah. So Bite-Size is an all ages series. It's a story about a group of 6 highly advanced robots that escape from their government lab and end up in this suburban family's home on Christmas Eve. And hijinks ensue from there. It's definitely a fun comic. It's a story that I wanted adults can read it for sure, but I wanted kids to be able to read it and get a real kick out of it, and hopefully turn them on to comics a little bit too.
Nelson, when I hear a description like that, my new favorite word that I've learned in the last couple of years regarding superheroes and merchandising, and that's the word toyetic. And I would imagine from that description and putting it in your hands that maybe that's one of the things in mind when you're designing these characters.
It's funny. So I started out doing toys. One of my first gigs when I was in my early 20s was drawing G.I. Joe, the actual toy boxes and the concept.
Wow. Yeah.
So I have some experience in that area, but what I really thought about, which kind of goes with being toyetic, was really if these things had to be animated in 3D, so this was a big departure for me artistically. Normally I'm doing Marvel, superhero, DC type stuff, you know what I mean? Or genre sci-fi. While it is sci-fi, this is kids sci-fi. This is true animation style, like cartooning. And so for me, going back to my very first job was in animation, doing web series and stuff. And everything had to turn, and all of the shapes had to be recognizable by their silhouette. And that's what makes them toyetic, right? It's like, even I remember being a kid going to buy Transformers and stuff like that and Hot Wheels or whatever and Micro Machines. And you can see that toy literally from like a mile away, right? If your friend had that in the yard, you're like, you got the new, fill-in toy here. And that comes from that thinking of having the silhouettes speak to the character and to the idea. And so each of these robots and each of these kids and family members and even the dog, they all have their own personality and identity. So when designing those things, that's what I really tried to bring across. And I think that does lend to the toyerism of the property.
Sure. Are you using a different set of materials to, kind of convey that three-dimensional idea that you're trying to do?
Just working digitally, although I will say it's a bit of a cheat code having Snakebite, our colorist, and Raza, our cover artist. When you guys see these covers, it's going to look like he 3D generated those covers. But the crazy thing is that they're very close to the drawings, especially like the robots. It's literally the same thing, but he makes it look like they actually sent this to a studio and 3D generated it. Yeah. So while I didn't have to use any tools, I just got to draw a bunch of cartoons. Those guys did the heavy lifting in terms of, taking care of that part of it.
Okay. And also you can't help but think of the Metal Men. And I don't know how much that might be an inspiration for this, Cullen or Nelson, but, based on the description, they've always been one of my favorite group of robots.
Well, you don't grow up in the era I grew up in without a healthy love of robots, because you've got everything from R2-D2 to Jason and Star Command, and those robots in Jason and Star Command were amazing. They were just little wonders, but I wanted that robot to be my friend. And then you get into movies like Batteries Not Included and Short Circuit.
Short Circuit, sure.
And we really wanted these robots, like I just said, we wanted them. These are the robots you want as your buddies. You want, if I were a kid, I would want these robots in my backpack as I go on adventures, wherever that may be. And they're not, the Metal Men, that's an interesting comparison because I think they're probably very different from that because these are not humanoid robots in the least. But when you see what Nelson has put together for these characters, and I mean, we talked a lot about what they would look like, and we really went back and forth. But the way each of these robots is very different. Each one has its own visual personality, but they're adorable. Even the mean ones.
Yeah, that was the idea. Is I wanted them all to be appealing, even if and this is not a spoiler, but even if one of them was going to open up and a buzzsaw was going to come out of its face, I want that to be a cute face before that happens, so that you wanted that toy, because kids want both. They want, because when I was a kid, I mean, I was into cool stuff, but if something was overly industrialized, when I was very young, it would turn me off. I needed that. It's emotional anthropomorphism, not visual anthropomorphism. So the idea that you could identify with it, and we talked about some of these things like Johnny Five. I think WALL-E's a great example. They have some qualities that allow us to relate to them, but they don't look like people at all. So that's kind of the wheelhouse that we're operating in.
Okay, I can see that. I want to ask everybody, and well, Mike, I was going to ask about again timing, because unlike the first wave of the AWA books, where it was the crime books and the supernatural books and stuff, now we're really getting kind of a potpourri. Moving forward, is that the idea that we will kind of see various genres all kind of debuting at the same time?
Yeah, we'll have a mix going forward. Again, it's sort of our first teen books, our first all ages books. The fact that they're coming out at the same time isn't necessarily part of a big grand strategy, but it did time out in a way that we're happy with. You'll still see books that are like our debut launches in subsequent months. We're still doing that genre, that sort of crime, horror, along with sort of more traditional superhero stuff a little more as well. To answer your question, yes, we've always planned to sort of feature all genres, and the fact that we're sort of bringing these out at the same time, we're happy with.
I want to go around the horn and ask why AWA for all of you. And Ethan, I'll start with you. What appealed? What's the difference? Is there a difference working in this capacity than the big two?
Well, first of all, Axel called me, and Axel is the guy who actually brought me into comic books in the first place. When he was at Marvel, led to my first big series with Old Man Hawkeye. So he literally could have called me and said, I need dry cleaning, and I would have been there. But that being said, I just love the breadth of talent and variety that AWA and Upshot in particular are bringing. They're giving a lot of freedom and just a vote of confidence in people to do different things that you don't always see on the shelves at comic stores. So, I'm a fan. I buy, every time I go to the comic store, I buy something else, whether it's, one of the first trades that came out recently or some, just
That's
as a fan.
Cool. And I imagine all of you were likely recruited by Axel. Hey man, I always say great editors are great tastemakers, because they're the first eyes on you guys and what you're proposing. And, Axel's had a lot of hits that he's overseen over the years. And I really do appreciate his critical eye when it comes to putting books together and stuff. So Dalibor, beyond maybe Axel calling you and asking you to come in, what are you liking about AWA right now?
Well, yes, of course. Axel call. But there's a backstory about Axel. Even before I was a professional artist, I was a friend with late Edwin Biukovic, who was at the time working on Human Target for Vertigo, edited by Axel. So I was a young, aspiring hothead, and I already, I felt like I knew the man through the stories told by Eddie. So when I finally got to work with him, it was like unbelievable for me. He discovered me, actually. He hired me first. And when he called again from AWA, it was like, nothing to think about. And then when we had a video call, and he told me what AWA was about, and the level of both freedom within the genres that AWA allowed, and the sense of fun that came from behind this presentation, it was like I was hooked. No question about it.
That's excellent. I'm so glad you guys are mentioning past books, and certainly no disrespect to what you're doing currently with AWA. But I do want to, and given that these are new books, some of the audience might have questions of Old Man Hawkeye or Human Target or some of the other books that Cullen and Ethan and Kari have worked on, and Nelson. So please, everybody, it's a jump ball as far as all of you watching right now. And you're more than welcome. I love that the chat is really kind of in its own world right now, talking to each other too. That's terrific. So really glad to seeing all that. Cullen, what attracted you to AWA?
Yeah, look, I get excited about exciting companies and companies that are doing something different and new and are open to taking on, these different kinds of projects. And it's great, it's great to get on the ground floor of this kind of thing. I love creator-owned books, obviously. And yeah, I mean, despite the, regardless of the Axel of it all, of him, calling and inviting me in and being a big part of me being able to do what I love for a living. I mean, you got to keep in mind, this is a guy who had us doing Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe, speaking of older books, which was not a kid-friendly book at all, but was willing to look at me doing a kid-friendly book for this project. And I think that's that's exciting. That spinner rack's just full of junk right now. I mean, not junk quality wise. It's all wonderful comics, but it's just stuff I'm sorting through my comic book closet, and it's just the extras that are sticking out there. Eventually, I'm going to put all my books out there.
Is that a Jim Demonakis spinner rack? I got to ask.
This is an old spinner rack I got off of Craigslist, like 20,
oh, great.
Yeah, or not 20, but 10, 15. I mean, it's an old rack that I got. It's an original.
Does it squeak? Yeah, I was gonna say, does it squeak when it turns? It's got to.
It screeches. It doesn't squeak.
That's outstanding. Before I ask Kari and Nelson, Ed has a good point where he says, I believe Axel has described the first AWA Opshot wave as genre mashing. Do these books also mash genres? And that's...
Yeah, I'd say absolutely. I mean, as Kari kind of touched on with E-RATIC, it is sort of this teen superhero story, but it is also very much a high school story. It really is that sort of two genres put together to make something even better. And then with BYTE-SIZED, it's a sci-fi book. It's an all ages book. It's a fun book about a family. It's one kind of cultural touchstone we haven't talked about yet is like Gremlins. I read it, it kind of reminds me of Gremlins. I think our letterer, Sal Cipriano, brought up a similar comparison. And by the way, I don't know if Colin Nelson, if I've told you this, but he is always very excited to get the new issues to letter because his son is such a huge fan of the book.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
Like, when's the next issue coming? Because I'm so excited to read it.
That's the best kind of advanced review I could hope for. That's awesome.
That sounds great, man. And yeah, Nelson, again, I mean, this is tapping, as you said, into, your toy past in a lot of ways. But is there any other opportunities you're seeing from AWA working with them?
Oh, 100%. So the thing about it with this project, obviously, like Axel showed up like Nick Fury and said you have a mission and all that stuff, right? So same story. He also helped bring me into Marvel. But the thing with this project in particular, there were actually a lot of things. Like I said, I have a background in, you know, toys and stuff, but like Cullen alluded to, and Mike as well, the touching on Gremlins and, you know, batteries not included and Big Hero 6 and stuff like that. These are things that I genuinely love and loved coming up. And I remember what the day literally that I decided to be a comic book artist was I was reading an issue of X-Men by Jim Lee. So I was like 10 or 11 years old. And I was reading it so intently, I almost got hit by a car. And I realized I like this so much that I need to do this. I can't do that again. That was silly. But this is what I need to do. And the thing that always struck me was I always wanted to make comics for me as a kid, because like a lot of kids, that's what I got into as, you know, for reading and stuff. That's what kind of got me addicted to it. Before I even got into the older stuff like Wolverine, I used to read Freddy Krueger comics and stuff like that. I read Archie, you know, I love that. And even as I started to get older, I read certain manga comics that still had that tone. So the opportunity to work on a book for that audience, I really, really wanted it, which you couldn't really tell from my previous history of drawing, you know, ladies on motorcycles with katana blades fighting ninjas. You don't see that, you know what I mean, that element of it. Yeah. But that was always really strong for me. And the idea that Cullen and Axel and Mike and the rest of the crew at AWA would trust me to do a book that was so outside of my known body of work was, I mean, I couldn't say no to that.
Gotcha. And Kari, what do you think? I mean, again, you're a longtime collaborator with Axel, and I'm not surprised that he tapped you to come in the fold. But and obviously with you know, E-RATIC and everything, there's a chance to do lighter stuff. But yeah, what appealed about AWA to you?
Well, when I first started at Marvel was the year that Axel first started at Marvel, I believe, and we both started working together pretty quick. And, you know, I was doing Hulk covers with Axel back then, and Spider-Man covers, and we kind of started this journey together. And he's always been one of my favorite editors. And when he became editor-in-chief of Marvel, I was happy for him, but it was a little sad for me because I no longer was working with him in that capacity. So when he left Marvel, you know, I was just like texted him immediately. He's like, whatever you need, let me know. Well, let's do it. And you know, I think today's world is so divisive. And everyone's so ready to just like destroy each other. Like you have to, you know, pick your battles and stand by your friends. And, you know, it wouldn't have mattered if Axel worked at Playmobil. I would have jumped on board, you know, like that's more important because I know that I'm a weirdo. Like I approach projects in a off way. I kind of zig when others are zagging. And I do better work when I have the right kind of support. And the kind of support that Axel can give me where it's like, you know, there's a lot of trust there and I do, you know, experimental things and he's into it. So, you know, even with E-RATIC, I'm doing some weird things with the backgrounds. I'm doing like kind of the art. I'm always trying new things. So I just knew it was like, it's a good environment. It's good. I love Axel, good company, you know, whatever he's doing, I knew was going to be cool. And I'm still working with Marvel, still working with DC. I'm kind of like approaching, I used to call myself, I used to say, here's the mistake. I think we talked about this before. I used to say I worked for Marvel Comics, and I had this revelation a few years ago that that's not true at all. I'm a freelance artist. I work for myself. I work with Marvel Comics, but there was a real hard line when I it's like when you realize that some truth about the world that it was like, you know, I work for myself and I love Marvel. I love the people there, but those people change. One thing you learn when you are a freelance artist is you will always outlast your editors. So from when I started Marvel, I think there's only one editor that's been there that's left. Now that's Tom Brevoort, who's been there the whole time. So, you know, you find your partnerships, you stick with them, you stick by your friends, you do good work, you find the right environment to like challenge things and experiment and, you know, create new opportunities for yourself. And if they work out, that expands to the people you love, and that expands to everyone. So, you know, that's a long way of saying I just followed Axel.
I understand. There's a question for you here, Kari, from Adam Anderson. Your covers for Year Zero were amazing. When you saw them at the local comic shop, they stood out and if you didn't buy them, you knew you were missing out. What inspired those covers?
That was Axel had a vision for the covers, which was a mixture of international covers that were kind of beauty shots, but were a bit absurd and a bit like something was off about them. So he had some ideas, I had some ideas, we jammed them out. And one of the things that was interesting about those covers was just the art style. I approached them more like a movie concept style, where I was integrating and painting with a lot of elements, painted and photographed and 3D and whatever, like jamming it together as if it was like a concept art for a movie. Whereas, some of the most recent DC covers I've done are like on airbrush and paint on paper. So I love it was really fun because it's both a unique look for the book, but also it gives me an outlet for my digital skills that maybe I wouldn't want to do on like Batman or whatever. But it was that weird juxtaposition of absurd and like a postcard image from some international traveler or something like that.
Interesting. Wow. Adam has another question, and Mike, I'll ask you this. Will the second volume of Resistance in Year Zero continue with the same characters or provide different perspectives?
So with Year Zero, that's coming out in less than 2 weeks, the second volume. You'll be able to see another fantastic Kari cover at your local comic shop very soon. That will be November 4th that's coming out.
Yeah, that's great.
That does follow new characters. So you will get some new perspectives. For anyone who's read the first volume, it follows various sets of characters in this zombie world. The second volume follows kind of new sets of characters later on down the line in different parts of the world. So it'll be sort of more tales from this same world. With the Resistance, I'm going to keep that under my hat a little bit for now. I'm going to use my editorial privilege to not reveal too much, but I think if you're a fan of the first series, you will enjoy this one. What I've read and what I've seen so far.
That sounds great. Here, Dex Baker makes a great point. I'm interested in hopping into this universe. It'll be like rediscovering comics all over again. Yeah, man, that honestly, I felt that way with the first wave of the books and everything. And especially, I'm a massive crime comic fan. I knew I was in good hands with Axel and the people he chose with the crime comics. And it's just great to read quality stuff where there are no, continuity barriers or weight to hold a story back, where as tough as things are going to get, even for somebody like Christopher Chance, Dalibor, I mean, they'd still probably want him around. He's probably going to get out of it some way or another. And that's truly what I love. And so, Dex, I agree with you, man. No, I think this is a great time to jump in. And as you can tell from this group of people, AWA has a great line of creators. They know what they're doing. And, starting with Joe Straczynski, right on down to everybody that's here right now. So I love it. And again, I've been very, very impressed. And I should say, too, Sunday, during the Comics for Kids period, we're going to have a Magnetic Press panel as well. We will be talking more about the kids line from AWA. So that's cool. I should acknowledge everyone is making references to the American Wrestling Association, the old AWA. But guys, that's like, hey, boy, I mean, people are asking if you guys are wrestling fans. I guess I'll throw it out there. But it's kind of like, the World Wildlife
right,
reclaiming the WWE. It's like, not necessarily congruent, kids, but thanks for playing. You know what I mean?
They were almost guaranteed not fans. They said, well, I look at Jake the Snake, and it was absolutely not. We're not on the same page here.
When I was a kid, I have a stinging memory of watching. I got to watch Andre the Giant fight Hacksaw Jim Duggan in person in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan.
Nice.
In the little hockey arena there. It blew my mind. It was amazing.
Look,
I hear you, man.
If you guys want to talk about old wrestling, we're going to need a couple more hours from because it's too big a part of my life growing up. So we'll leave it at that.
I understand, man. That's hilarious. Coming from Chicago, we were a big territory, so I certainly had my 70s memories of Moose Cholak and Bobo Brazil and Jimmy Superfly Snuka and the like. So I understand. See, we all got our wrestling cred, kids. We weren't going to let you down. Don't worry about it. Well, in closing, guys, I'm happy to go around the horn. Anything you guys want to promote as far as, what to look for? I mean, again, all these books are debuting in the weeks and months ahead. Kari, I was going to ask what's happening directing-wise. I love that part of your freelance career as well, that you're a horror movie guy as much as you are a comic book guy.
It's a weird life I have. So I did a movie called Sniper Assassin's End, which is actually Sniper 8, amazingly enough.
Outstanding.
That came out in June, and it reached the #1 in iTunes, in Apple iTunes. So
hey, that's awesome, man.
That's my latest film and directing endeavor. And then, right now I'm writing a new script, and I had a series I was supposed to be directing now that went away because of COVID. But whatever. It's my secret identity, the comics and the directing. So I'm pretty much focused on comics right now. But there were always. I'll let you know when the next thing comes up, and we can
please do, man. Because honestly, I do. I always love talking about filmmaking as much as I do comic book making.
I know you're a huge movie fan, as am I. So it's what a crossover, right? Here's superhero comic books. Every superhero comic book fan is probably a wrestling fan and probably a movie fan, and it's like that weird wrestling, movies, comics, toys. It's actually a square. Animation. What is 5? A pentagram?
Pentagram.
Oh God.
Pentagram.
Hilarious. Ben, is it Ben Uncles or Ben Unk? Yeah, Ben Uncles. AWA is making some of my favorite books on the stands right now. Having a global pandemic during your nascent days can't have been easy, but you guys are killing it. Yeah, man. Like I said, Axel and Jemis and company. Again, they've assembled a hell of a team of people, and I think it's pretty amazing the stuff that you guys have been putting out. And I congratulate all of you.
The cool thing. Let me tell you the cool thing before we wrap up is
we got time.
Marvel and DC Comics have taken over pop culture in a way that I haven't seen since action movies in the 80s, and it's cool. It's amazing, and it's really cool. On the flip side, if you try to Google Captain America, you'll get 3 pages of Chris Evans before you get one single image of a Jack Kirby Captain America.
It's
right. Kind of like, I think AWA is a great opportunity for comic books to do comic books, to sell comic books, to be comic books, to make comic books, to read comic books. It's not trying so hard to be a movie. If that happens, great. I'm sure everyone would like that to happen, but there's a thing a weird circular thing. And remember what happened to Batman in the 60s after the TV show became successful? It started corrupting the book Batman.
The comics, absolutely, man. Yeah, poor representation.
To write the ship, right? And I feel like in some other companies that's happened a little bit. And that's right. As of now, this company's uncorrupted by the touch of success from Hollywood. So I think it's a very pure reading experience with some very high concept book by high caliber people, perhaps myself excluded.
I understand, and I agree with that. Daymares, Cullen, any more plans for Missouri Swagger? And how does it feel to be second fiddle on your own podcast?
Listen here, Daymares. I don't know who you are, pal, but we're going to have an AWA old school wrestling match right now. No, Missouri Swagger, I hope so. I was actually just sitting here because I saw someone comment about Dennis Hopeless, who is Dennis Hopeless and Kyle Strom do Missouri Swagger with me. And yes, I am second fiddle in my podcast, The Bungalow, because my co-host is my wife, and I will always be second fiddle. My wife.
That's outstanding. Missouri Swagger, talk a little bit about it, Cullen.
It just started out with my arch enemy Dennis Hopeless and I decided we needed to talk about comics and life, and we started doing it on a YouTube channel, and we brought in Kyle Strom, talented artist, to also. It's just basically us sitting around talking. Sometimes it gets a little too loose, like there's no format whatsoever.
That's all right.
But we're on a little bit of a hiatus, but I kind of would like to bring it back for sure.
Hey man, that's great. I'm always happy when more creators are podcasting or vlogging or whatever, man. So that's outstanding to hear. Very much so. Let me see what else is going on in the chat. Marvel Arrow is an amazing comic. Is anyone responsible for Marvel Arrow right now in this group? or is that a random? It's a random tangent. Well, thank you very much, there, Ricky. We appreciate it.
Good to know, though. I'm excited to look whatever that is. I know the Arrow Bar with Halloween coming up. I'm very excited about jumping into that.
I like that. That's fantastic. Guys, seriously, I really appreciate you coming on. And once again, Mike or creators, tell us when these books are going to be dropping, and we can start looking for them on the stands and online.
Sure. So for E-RATIC and the trade version of COVID Chronicles, that'll be out December 2nd. With COVID Chronicles, if you go to the NBC News website, they have a hub page for it. It's called COVID Chronicles. If you Google NBC News COVID Chronicles, it'll pop right up. So you can check those out now, but the trade will be out in December. And then a week later, BYTE-SIZED #1 will be out December 9th. And the general AWA plugs, I guess, is that the trades are out now. We have several great ongoing series out now. So if you haven't jumped in yet, there's plenty of opportunity to. And just, Kari, I appreciate what you said about the company. That's sort of exactly what we're going for, telling a good story first. And in comics, that means, it's the marriage between script, art, colors, letters, and the cover. All of those things tying together to give the reader an experience.
You know what it is? It's the high level athlete before he gets rich. It's still that sweet spot of like, these are just good comics. Read them and enjoy them. Like, you want in now, because if you try to jump in 8 years from now, who knows?
I want to throw in Jordan's question here, and Mike, I'll ask you to answer. Compare AWA to Image, I suppose, from a business standpoint as much as a creative standpoint.
From a business standpoint, it's a little bit different. I mean, Image is very much 100% creator owned with just some sort of back end services to help with publishing. Whereas we're a little more of a traditional publishing house, but we also incentivize creators in a different way.
Understood. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I started at Image with Top Cow, working next to Mark Silvestri for several years.
Yeah.
And it's a very different thing because over at Image, you have the sections where creators come in and say, we want to do books. And then you've got the schools of like Mark Silvestri and Jim Lee, how they had Wildstorm and Top Cow coming out of Marvel and, doing really ongoing series almost all the time and stuff like that. A lot of stuff at AWA is just a bunch of creators getting together and telling a story. And it's really super simple. There's not like Image that you can watch 5-6 documentaries on Image. There's a lot of drama and interesting history there, and talent and characters and stuff like that. But this is a little different in the way we just kind of tell stories.
I understand.
And with E-RATIC, E-RATIC in specific is part of a new universe. So it's like, as opposed to Image where they're self-contained isolated pods, E-RATIC is part of a new
shared universe.
And not every AWA book is like that, but definitely it was interesting to interface that way.
Yeah, and the
Understood.
other
I'm sorry, I got to interrupt, guys, because we got to go.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we're up against the clock, and I know that the Justice League guys have entered the Watchtower, and Superman's giant key to the fortress isn't. They got to jiggle it.
Snyder cut.
We're trying to break in. Gentlemen, well done. Thank you very much. I'm sorry Axel Alonso couldn't have joined us, but that's all right. We did a great conversation. Everybody take care. Thanks for watching. Stick around in just a few minutes. It's the Justice League Bwahaha panel featuring all your favorite creators from 1987. J.M. DeMatteis, Keith Giffen, Kevin McGuire, and yours truly talking to them. Thanks a lot for watching, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Take
thank
care.
you.
Thanks for having us.
Take care.